Welcome to our 7th annual Codex FutureLaw conference. All right, thank you. Great. I love the energy. My name is Roland Vogel. I'm Executive Director of Codex. It's really wonderful to have you all here today. It's a great day we have ahead of us. We have an amazing lineup of speakers and a great group of folks in the audience. Technology, as we all know, is really reshaping our legal system and raises a number of important new questions. Sorry for the audio. Both on the legal as well as on the technology side. And so when I'm generally asked to describe, So when I'm asked to describe what Codex is about, I generally say it's an interdisciplinary research center at Stanford University that focuses on research, on improving, using technology to improve the legal system. But what's been getting more and more clear to me in recent years is that we've also become a community of folks who are really driving innovation in the legal system. So this community aspect has become ever more important for our center. And this is a community that spans the globe, and with folks working on exciting projects around the world. We have people here joining us from countries like Brazil, France, Singapore, China, India, Germany, and many others. So thank you so much for taking on the long journey to be with us here today. It's really wonderful to have you. So fittingly, our conference today will be kicked off with a keynote by Dharmishta Root on the future of community. We will, after Dharmishta's keynote, we will have our first panel on the future of legal tech, civil procedure, and the adversarial system. That will be followed after a short coffee break by our second morning panel on the future of legal education. And then at 12:20 we'll break for lunch, and we'll reunite again at 1:10 when we'll hear short updates on our Codex Tech Index database, learn about some trends we're seeing there, and then introduce to you our new legal data commons project. And then we'll have our law education and experience talks, which is a series of TED Talks about emerging issues and important projects, which we call Lex Talks. And that will, after a short coffee break, be followed by the afternoon panels. The first one on government as a platform, and the second one, the rise of free law, which will be at 3:40. And then after that, last but not least, we'll have our closing keynote from GitHub's Chief Strategy Officer, Julio Avalos, titled "Lawyers Are Over, Long Live Lawyers, How the Next Generation Can Save the World." So we can see the big themes emerging from this agenda, which are community, global, and openness. And I think, we have an exciting day ahead of us. So before we get started, just a few thank yous. First of all, our affiliate and conference partner, Thomson Reuters, for their direct support of this conference. Thank you very much, Thomson Reuters. I would also like to thank all our affiliates of the program in Law, Science, and Technology for their generous support. Our conference partner, the Stanford Center for the Legal Profession, under the leadership of Professor Rodi and Jason Solomon, for their support. To all our speakers who have decided to come here today and share their expertise and insights with us. To the Stanford Program Group under Trish Gertridge for their tireless work in putting this event together. And then to Law, Science, and Technology Assistant Director Susan Selkind and Codex Residential Fellow Jamison Dempsey, who've also worked very hard to put this event together. So thank you all for your contributions. So with that, it's my pleasure now to introduce our opening keynote speaker, Dharmishta Root. Dharmishta is Senior Director of Community Leadership at Singularity University. Prior to Singularity, she worked for Code for America, where she was leading their accelerator and incubator and awards program. She was a fellow in psychology at Harvard, a fellow at the MIT Media Labs Center for Civic Media, and she also worked as a researcher at the Berkman Center for Internet and Society. All right, so as I mentioned, Dharmishta will enlighten us about the future of communities. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dharmishta Root.
Thanks, Roland. I have to adjust the mic to a different height. Can you guys hear me now? Great. So we have a really amazing program today. I'm very excited to now be part of your Codex community here and really looking forward to the closing from Julio with some really clear takeaways for what people in the legal profession can do. So today I'm going to cover 4 things: what community is, what's happening in community, what's happening at the intersection of technology and community, and finally, what we can do to build the future. So before I get started, can I get a show of hands if you like reading books? This is a lot of the room. We have a lot of readers. Okay, don't worry about that. We'll come back to that later. So first, given that everyone here focuses on technology, legal things, very data-driven, logical, I thought I would start with why community is important. So first, instead of me telling you, I'd like to start with sharing amongst yourselves why you participate in community and what does it mean for you. Get in pairs, and if you see someone by themselves, invite them to your group so no one has to be by themselves for our community building exercise. Just take like 1-minute tweet-length statements, not like Facebook post, like 140 characters. If the second person hasn't shared yet, please switch. Seems like everyone has a lot to say. If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. If you can hear me, clap 3 times. The summer camp tricks work at any age for community building, just so you know. Always works. So you may feel just a little more connected to the people you just spoke with. You may feel a little more trust, a little more openness towards them. Maybe, maybe not. But this is something that really happens when you build community. One of my favorite definitions of community is from my friends at the Community Canvas, where they talk about building trust and feeling this sense of belonging, that we belong together, we go together. And so when you build community, you're really building collaboration, trust, identity, and building these meaningful, ongoing relationships together. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about community here today. And back to data and how does community actually impact you, there are real measurable things that happen with community for you and in your life. So one really interesting research on this is from Yale, from a person named Nick Christakis, who focuses on not just you and not your friends, and not their friends, but your friends, 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 and how those connections actually can, with statistical reliability, predict things about you as a person for people you don't even know. This is like way many links into your Facebook friends, Facebook friends, Facebook friends, but in real life. These predict things about where you work, even potentially your weight, your interests. You can learn these things about someone from these networks. And being in community actually increases life expectancy. So people who have loneliness and social isolation actually are at a 50% mortality rate compared to those who have sense of belongingness and people around them. To put this into perspective, this is actually more risky for early death than obesity and worse than smoking 15 cigarettes a day, statistically speaking. So stay connected. Also, we find that actually the weak ties are what support us in addition to our close friends. So for finding partners, finding new jobs, these type of things, they often come through our weak ties, which isn't a bad thing. You may think of weak as, ooh, it's bad, but actually it just means people you don't know very well right now. So people in your network, your friends of friends, people maybe with a similar religious identity or cultural identity, these are the people who bring new people close to you. And there are upsides where feelings of belonging can facilitate happiness. This one's obvious, but also really data-driven research back that being in community truly makes you happy, and also can protect against depression if you are really feeling belongingness and connection. And this isn't only on the mental front, this also happens in physical pain. So in studies where participants have experienced physical pain, when they have these feelings of social connection and have the presence of a community member, it decreases their perceived physical pain, being in community and in connections with others. And so you may be wondering, well, what's happening to community? I've been hearing different headlines. Are people getting lonelier? What's happening? Especially if community, now that we know it's so good for us. So in 1950, 30% of the world lived in cities. Today, we're at a little over half of the global population is living in urban areas. And based on projections, 68% of the world will be living in cities by 2050. But what this means is actually, at this moment, more people live alone than ever before. 15% of the households in the world are for one person living by themselves. And in 2014, 1 in 4 Americans report they have no community members that they would discuss something important with. This used to be 1 in 10 people in the 80s. And these costs, back to those health effects of not being in community, this is actually also very costly. It's costing $6.7 billion in Medicare for the aging populations that are not able to maintain connections and maintain those health benefits of staying connected. And this is especially pervasive in youth. So in people who are 16 to 24 years old, 40% of them report strong loneliness, which is higher than the general population of older adults. So all of this is happening at the same time as technology. We can wonder, well, what could we do about this? How could we use technology? We have a bunch of legal experts and technologists in the room. So what are people already doing? And what are examples of community with technology? So I have 4 very diverse examples of what's happening in community with technology. So this is a picture of a technology. The technology is a social technology, not a digital technology. And this is a blanket fort innovation. A couple in Massachusetts has decided to facilitate more close connection, sense of belongingness, coziness, you might even say, in a set of community dinner parties. And so they've been doing experiments. There's been 7 of these dinners where the group will actually construct the physical environment around them to become more cozy and feel more comfortable. And they found that people do create these stronger bonds in these networks. And so in the same way that the blanket forts actually create this environment for social connection, you can do the same thing with digital technology, where you facilitate certain types of interactions and certain things that are more possible or less possible, more likely or less likely, through the actual structures you're building. Technology, in many ways, very different than blanket forts, but similar in that it creates these structures that can create different social interactions. So another example of what's happening more directly in digital technology is a collaboration between software called CoBudget and Ethereum-based DAO stack. So what happens in these two technologies is in CoBudget, community members allocate budget collectively and decide where do we want our shared monetary assets to go. And then directly with blockchain, these decisions are then immediately transferred to the areas where that funding was allocated. But what's really interesting about this, in addition to having all of the things that we'll discuss many times today about blockchain, about technology, about governance, this actually was built in community. And so there's a community that started in New Zealand called Inspiral. This community is a bunch of community builders, collaborators, and they work together really collectively. And internally, they found they needed a way to make decisions related to money. And how could they, as a group, make those decisions in a really collaborative and in a really fair way? So community members in this group built a tool just for themselves and used it internally. And then another community member, not even the person who built it, said, I think this could be a business. And so then a group of people got together and formed a company called Greater Than that delivers the CoBudget software and collaborative tools for people working really collaboratively. And so this is an example, instead of the story we often hear here in Silicon Valley, where it's one person with one idea who built something by themselves. This is a group of people building with their community for their community, and then this organization actually gives back to Inspiral when this business is successful, this greater collective is successful, due to a structure they've created to allow that really close collaboration. Another example outside of the US of technology in rural areas is a place at Amrita University in India called Amachi Labs. This group focuses on building humanitarian use cases for technologies. And so what they commonly do is actually create haptic technologies that train mainly women in rural villages, vocational skills, so that these women can then create this economic sustainability for their local areas and for their communities and for themselves and their family. And in addition to working with these technologies, they collaborate directly with these rural villages on community initiatives. So one example of this is a local village in India that, due to modernization, globalization, there has started being trash around the village that's very prevalent. And so they collaborated with the women in the village to start a community cleanup so that this area can be as pristine as it was before there was so much plastic on our earth. And so the women have started sewing these bags that the community can then use to collect the trash so it's not littering the area and also being a potential public health concern. They, as a group of women, also met with the men in their local community and invited them in as stakeholders and said, please collaborate with us. And the whole village collaborates now. And even the schools are now participating in this village in the local trash cleanup through the women coming together as a community in collaboration with other vocational skills they're learning through more digital technologies. And so building the community with technology, but also with that human social connection has been really important in this sustainability of this local village. Another more legal technology is happening in New Zealand and a few other places around the world, such as Canada. This is giving rivers and forests and lakes legal personhood so that legal action can be taken on behalf of these local rivers and streams and lakes. And also, no one can own them because they're their own legal person. And this is done in collaboration with the local indigenous village due to those indigenous populations' respect for and reverence for nature. They have created a legal structure that allows these forests and streams and lakes to all be cared for in a very respectful and inclusive way. And for those of you who were at the Legal Hackers Summit last year, this photo will be familiar. This is one of the workshops of a tool called the Community Canvas. And it was really workshopped. I think it was the second workshop ever that this group did. And so this Community Canvas is another example of a tool created in collaboration with community. That's similar to the business model canvas, for those of you familiar with the tool commonly used by startups to create a really simple business plan that's very easily understood and really understand your own assumptions and your own strategy. This is a way for community builders, and any of you, now that you know about this tool, to build communities and foster communities in a way that's very thoughtful. And so instead of a person by themselves building this tool, there is a group of people that has done interviews with 120 community builders around the world to build this tool. And they have launched it to about 100,000 downloads, and community members have volunteered to translate this into 14 different languages. And so the next iteration of this tool is coming out of, you might have guessed it, a collaboration with, in this case, a lot of Post-its, where the core team is getting together and continuing to develop the tool and has now an advisory committee of 150 people, including me, but that's besides the point. So really building community around the world of all of the people who create these type of tools. And so these examples are very different, but can give you a flavor of the types of things that are possible when community is brought together. So I wanted to leave with some specific instructions for how to build this thriving future together. How can we hang on to those health benefits and personal benefits and benefits for all of us of staying connected? And so to me, there's only 3 simple steps to doing this, and I'll get into exactly how we do that. So the first one is really taking care of yourself. But as a researcher, I like to explain with data how this works. And so there are a few real science-backed ways you can really take care of yourself. A mentor of mine talks about there being 2 categories of problems in the world. This is from a Tibetan Lama, Tulku Lobsang. He says that these 2 categories are 1, problems that you can change. You can take action and you can solve the problem. And in that case, it's not a problem because you can fix it. The second category is problems that you cannot do anything about at this particular moment. And so if you can't do anything right now, it's also not a problem. Maybe a bigger thing that we can work on together, but in this moment, something you can not take personal stress for, even though you can still take action to move that forward in the future. So within this category of things you can change and things you can facilitate for yourself, there's really 2 things that really help your own personal well-being to prepare you to do all of the amazing work that you're doing all around the world. So the first is very simple: sleep. This is one of the most research-backed ways to maintain your health, get increased cognitive functioning, have better memory, and potentially even lose weight. And it's something that just happens naturally for most of us. We just avoid it and put off going to sleep, but it's really one of the best tools backed by science for truly taking care of yourself. The second thing is finding a mindfulness practice that works for you. So this is another thing backed by research, finding ways of paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally, which is a definition of mindfulness from the researcher John Kabat-Zinn. And there are techniques like meditation, but also just taking a walk without looking at your phone, taking a run, sitting by a lake and observing it, whether the lake has legal personhood yet or not. You can sit and observe the lake and just be present, and you get incredible benefits like a decrease in high blood pressure or a decrease in cortisol, one of the body's responses to stress. So you can get these measurable benefits to really prepare yourself to then take these other steps in the world. So how many people raised your hands when I asked can I get a show of hands if you raised your hand before when you were interested in books? Yeah? Still, I think some people lost interest in books or just are shy. Well, so now, I did not forget, I have some book recommendations for you, and you can come find me after. I can also write them down for you on how to really implement these practices. So the second recommendation for you in your work is to connect deeply with your communities. And so one of the ways to do this, I know I promised books, but this is a really good BuzzFeed article that actually has real steps you can do to show up for your friends and for your network. Showing up not just in times when everything's going well, but showing up in times when they may be under stress. They may say, no, I'm okay, I don't need you. And you can say, well, why don't I just show up anyway and just see if you need anything? And really showing up in a way that really builds those strong bonds. So there aren't 1 in 4 people feeling isolated. You can be the person who helps another person not feel isolated, and then we will build all of these benefits of community together. The second thing you can do is volunteer, which both benefits your local community, but also actually scientifically is proven to benefit your own well-being and increase your own personal happiness when you volunteer. And so this is something you can do similar to getting sleep, connecting with people that actually will simultaneously give back to the community and support yourself. And then you can participate in local communities. I know many of you are in legal hackers. There's been some collaborations between legal hackers and Code for America brigades. You can participate in what I work on when I'm not here, Singularity University chapters, which are building local community around what we call exponential technology, cutting-edge technology such as blockchain, AI, robotics, and how to use those technologies for social good in the world. And there are many more local communities that you can find aligned with your interest and your goals. And to really understand both how people are disconnected and how to connect, there are a couple amazing reports that really facilitate this connection. And then the third thing you can do to build the thriving future together is include those who are not like you. So for this, if I can get everyone to just close your eyes just for a second. And now imagine a group of 20 people. Can you picture all of them, see their faces? Now imagine a group of diverse people. And just observe for yourself, you don't need to share with anyone, whether you had to change any of the demographics of that group. You can open your eyes now, but I won't make you raise your hands. But just observe, did you have to change that group to include people who weren't included in the first group? And that can help give you an idea of who you might be able to bring in to your community, to your networks, to your world, if they weren't in that first group. And so we found that diverse organizations in a work context actually provide more innovative outputs and also actually get more revenue and have better business outcomes. So it is also very beneficial in addition to the just moral values of maintaining diversity. It is a proven benefit to have a diverse team. And so you can always continue to educate yourself and grow about the inequalities and different types of more systemic oppression in the world. So there's a couple books that I really, really love and would recommend that everyone read. These are specifically about race, but you can take the learnings also into context across gender, ability, age, different ways of building diverse groups. And so we find that trust and belonging are these threads that weave us all together, maintaining our health, maintaining our networks, building beautiful collaborations all around the world. And so what can you do as technologists and lawyers? And I know Julio's going to share some specific things on the legal front later today. But laws and technologies, not just blanket forts, create many of the structures and norms of society and interaction. And so you have the power to create policies that facilitate this type of diversity and equity and inclusion and connection, and same for technologies. And you can also give back to the commons by using data standards, open source, and general just sharing whenever possible. And so we're all made of the earth and the stars, and so you can include the earth in your community as well, just like you would any other stakeholder who you respect and who are your elders. And so we can build actually a more connected world together. And so come find me after if you'd like to discuss any of this or want any more book recommendations. Thank you.
Marvelous talk about communities and how it helps build people. I'm one of those smart Alex in law schools back in the day, so I was just curious about your perspective about communities who are more maligned or like hate groups and terrorist types of groups, about that type. I know the positivities of it all, but it's something in which I'm just cognizant of more of how technology is being manipulated for those types of purposes. And I was just curious about your thoughts and perspectives about that.
Yeah, great question. So at least for me personally, technology is a tool that you can use to create any stuff. And so for me, I feel it's my responsibility for any technologies I create or can be part of creating, thinking about those shared values and what is or is not allowed on those networks. And so it can be possible for companies or individuals running technology platforms to decide what are those norms and what is appropriate and what's inappropriate. And so something that's really important within community building is creating a code of conduct and creating a really clear system for someone violating that code of conduct, having a very clear path of leaving that community. And so if a community is created or a technology is created with those structures, it becomes very easy to say, well, these type of hate speech or these type of things are not aligned with our clearly stated community values, and then it becomes very easy to say you're gonna have to take these type of comments to another place.
Well, and the enforceability of those rules and conduct, which is difficult to, you can say you can do one thing, but never truly enforce. It's the what's it called, the law itself, and then the actual carrying out of the law. But no, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that great question.
Hi, thank you so much for that very stimulating talk. I guess I was struck by the fact that social psychology has sort of developed concurrently, but largely separate from computer science. And one of the effects of that is that the development of things like social media that have these phenomenal social consequences that are understandable in terms of this other discipline, but these disciplines don't touch very often. And you refer to the work of Nicholas Christakis, who I think is an outstanding example of where these things do touch. So, for example, with his recent work with how social bots can dramatically affect the effectiveness of social organizations, that the sort of social characteristic that they have is reflected in the overall interactions with groups. But I wonder if what we really need is, when we talk about socially aware computing, it's not just do the right thing, you know, in the sort of common sense, but or in ordinary parlance, but the fact that this is something that we are social creatures, that we do now have the tools to understand how our behavior is dependent on others and how technology needs to be informed by that in a way that it isn't now. So I wonder if...
Yeah, great question. So I would say for me personally, I'll include myself as someone in this room. I think all of us here involved in technology and involved in those legal structures have the ability to create what are norms and what is appropriate and what's not. And so creating exactly what you're talking about multidisciplinary collaborations, being informed by human well-being, the well-being of the earth, and how we can use technology to facilitate that is a super important conversation to be having in as many places as you can find people who will listen and then take action.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. I think you've touched on this and some of the other questions perhaps did, but two questions. One, you mentioned that diverse groups, diverse organizations tend to have better business outcomes and organizational outcomes, and I wonder if you could talk about why that is, to the extent that there's research on that. And two, I'm sure all of us can think of a number of ideas, but what is your opinion about, like, what are the appropriate goals for community? I think two of the ones that are implied from what you shared or presented are specific community goals like waste management, resource management, and also individual health. That individual health is improved by community building, but what are kind of the broad types of goals that community building helps achieve?
Yeah, thanks. So on the diversity question, I often use a lot of nature metaphors and research about nature to understand humans as part of a broader ecology. And so if you look at the diversity of something like a forest, if that forest becomes very homogeneous, it becomes more at risk for different types of forest diseases or some forest fires in some cases. But if there is diversity with the different types of capabilities of those different plants, you're then able to have a lot more resilience in that forest. And I think it's very similar with human groups. When you can have different perspectives come to the table, you're able to understand, oh, what are these other different risks that I wouldn't think of from my perspective, but you would find so obvious. If you have people with different perspectives and different experiences together, you're able to think of those things in advance and really get out in front of them in terms of innovation, business, and anything else, but most of the research on it I've seen has been in the business context. And then on the second question of the goals of community, the way I would first answer it in a kind of meta way is, to me, community is very natural. Being together is very natural. As we see from the health impacts, it's very good for people to be very connected. And so to me, community is just a way of being that I think we can cultivate as a community here, be stewards of how can we really show up and really be stewards of belonging. And that then from there you can cascade, okay, well then in that specific community, are we building work products together? Are we building a family, and in our neighborhood, we want our neighborhood to come together for dinners? Is our goal to clean up our community? You can then set those more granular goals with the community, but at a high level, community is just part of being. And I think it's something that's easy to forget in a very isolated world.
Hey, you touched a little bit about inclusion, inclusivity. Can you riff a little bit on the balance between community and tribalism, pseudo-speciation? Like, how do you create the sense of community without actually now creating the sense of us and them and now warfare?
Yeah, so I would say this is really where education of all the community members in a group comes into play, where people can be naturally drawn to each other when there are similarities, whether these are more visible similarities or more conceptual similarities. Groups can be drawn to each other, and so inviting people in any group to be aware, well, who are we, what is our shared identity, and are there ways we could invite people in for their perspectives, for their participation, so that then communities can become more inclusive. It does take individuals in that group usually inviting in, and so it's something that is very important to me in educating people about how to do that, why to do that.
But human beings have this sense of us and them. Like, so what you're talking about, forgive me for saying, it sounds noble, but how do you actually get people to realize that it's not just noble, it's self-interested? Because generally people are just like, no, this is us, this is my family, right, and everyone else is outside, and you know, because they're different, they're not as good as us, and therefore everything that we see in our society starts happening.
Yeah.
Like, so how do you overcome that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of research on compassion and empathy, and really cultivating those as practices, thinking of it almost like a muscle or like a capability you can strengthen. And so the more people can find those practices of empathy and of compassion, you can then potentially, hopefully, expand your sense of my and mine to maybe ours. And then in that sense of self-identity, you can then include people. And so that's where it becomes very important to think about, well, who am I including in us and we? So that then, whether it's someone who is very deliberately saying, I'm including only people very much like me, or someone intending to be inclusive to everyone, but who just, as another thing very relevant in research, through our society and our structures, we do have unconscious biases. So that's why it's very important to become aware of those unconscious biases, especially for those of us who are very interested in how do we open up from mine to ours, as you put it so well.
Terrific, thanks.
Thank you. And I can recommend lots of things to read for anyone who wants to, get a big stack of books later.
Hi, Dharmishta. That was a wonderful presentation, very eye-opening, and actually, I could really connect with it, which was very nice. So I was wondering that while you were talking about community formations and all the things that you've spoken here, so at that time I was thinking about, 4 things actually. Community, as you spoke about, globalization, then segregation or being alone, and the terrorism as such, because that seems to be quite rampant. And I've been thinking about those things. And in that context, and what this gentleman just spoke about, is the role of diaspora. So when, when we have globalization, and now all of us are from everywhere here present, we basically then start coalescing within our own types, right? So thereby we have these diasporas and stuff. So I was wondering if there is any kind of a, research or analysis of how diaspora versus community, how does that work? And if, they are, say, they're cooperative or non-cooperative, or how they affect the communities. Because now these days, with all the people moving in here as in, Indians going there and those people going somewhere else. It's a totally different world right now. There is no longer a sense of who's an Indian or who's an American, who's a Canadian. So I was just wondering if there are any, if there is any work or ideas that you might have on diaspora versus community, and how that can help, I guess, resolve the current problem in terrorism and things like that, and bring together people. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Quick follow-up question. For those in the room not familiar with the word, can you define how you would define diaspora?
Sorry?
For your question on community versus diaspora, can you define for folks in the room how you define diaspora?
Diaspora is basically, one regional group coming together. So if suppose I'm from India or from Canada or whatever, so now I'm here, I have my friend here who's also from India, and then our communities as such are all, the Indian communities, our restaurants are all, so all the people here from India, they form the diaspora, just like people from Africa, different countries and all that stuff. They have their own groups. The Chinese people will have a group. Those are the diasporas, so people who have come from India to here, their group here, according to me, is a diaspora. So
there's a lot of best practices in the diversity and inclusion space, particularly around people convening communities, whether it is more formal, something like a conference or a workplace, or even something informal, maybe a community group with a website. And there are some tactical things that people convening communities can do to really invite others in. Subtle changes in language, things like listing, we are seeking a diverse, set of applicants, set of community members, people to come to this community meetup, so that when people read those things, they go, oh, this is for me, it's not just for this other group. And so there are a lot of really research-backed, even just small ways to change those things to then be inclusive if you're the person hosting a group. And then also as someone who's not the host, you can inform your own perspectives and say, well, back to when we closed our eyes and said, picture a community and then a diverse community. How can you seek out more connection and awareness of people outside of groups you might be most close to?
And just one thing before I leave.
Please.
Just in addition to the book list you have, there is one that I can also talk about or recommend. It's called Dalai Lama's Cat. Try and read it. You'll really like it very much. It opened up a lot of things. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for that talk. So I'm part of a research group that has computer scientists and sociologists, as well as legal scholars. And we convened maybe a year ago, and it's been kind of creating this cross-disciplinary community across these different communities. And I wanted to lead a discussion on, so we work in the fairness accountability area in machine learning and sort of focus on bias issues and fairness issues.
Thank you.
So, you're welcome. It's really hard work. But one thing we noticed is many of the conferences that we either run or, the venues are somewhat diverse, but, they're pretty much white males talking about how fairness, there's disparate impact in communities of color. So I thought it would be an interesting discussion to have from a research ethics standpoint, like what, as researchers who either draw data or draw inspiration from situations that affect minority communities, what responsibility do we have from a research standpoint? And this very sensitive, open-minded group of people could not have this discussion. There was exhaustion almost, like, oh God, I'm a computer scientist, I already have to talk to lawyers and these sociologists, and there's almost this I saw people just tapped out and not able to talk about this other thing. It wasn't that they were opposed to it, they just couldn't. So, I don't know, this is more of do you have tips? How do you, when people who are very well-meaning and you know that they are very community-focused are just exhausted because they have so much else going on, how do you still manage to have a conversation that goes somewhere?
So, lots of thoughts. So, I think first, and this goes back to that personal responsibility thing, though you can't tell them, get them to sleep and meditate and do those things when everyone takes their own responsibility and says, how can I really show up 100%. That's each of our own personal responsibility. And then within those groups, I think framing what are the goals and what is the scope of the discussion, because it's so easy to get very intellectual very quickly and try and solve all the problems, but say, okay, today.
Or very emotional. I mean, it was, yeah, the conversation got crazy and then it stopped.
Yeah.
So
then,
yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just another quick idea that, that may help is helping folks in the group be aware of what are norms and what is happening in the world and why it might be hard to talk about. And having that self-awareness, but that a facilitator could help the group, or a reading list, or any number of ways to get that awareness. And then also finding ways of including representatives from different backgrounds, maybe in some advisory group or some people who may not live as closely here, but finding people in that community. And it's a careful balance of wanting to both make space for people to come in, but also not putting the burden of needing to say, hey, there's an unfairness or there's a problem on the people who are already excluded. So in places where you do have any amount of privilege and can be the person including, making sure you're the person who can take that ownership and make that space for whether someone else does speak up or you're the one to do it, really just not waiting for someone who's not included in any number of different ways to raise their hand and say, hey, can someone let me in?
Exactly.
But be the person opening that door. And it's really hard work, and it gets in so many people's feelings and sense of identity. And I think another helpful framing is thinking of what are types of unconscious bias or systemic oppression, and lifting it away from are people like good people or bad people. They can just say, oh, we live in a society. There are these norms, and many of them are not good, and we want to change them. And so it's like you against the norms instead of you against each other. And that reframing can be really helpful for people there, where then you're, got excited about this. So, so you can reframe it so you have a shared goal.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your talk. It's very inspiring, and I especially like the tip of sleep. Yeah, and you just talk about bringing two communities together, like for example, technology community and legal community. And I work with both these two communities, and I find there's a problem or difficulty. Sometimes these two communities, people in these two communities, have totally or diverse values. And how do you think about the difficulty about these two values? For example, in tech community, they will argue like, oh, in the future, code is law. However, in legal community, lawyers will always argue, oh, no, code can never be law, or in what kind of situation this statement is true. Yeah. What's your take on how to solve these difficulties?
Yeah, so when groups come together, a best practice you can use is setting a set of guidelines for that group, which can be anything from very simple of try and talk only, say there's 10 people, talk 1/10 of the time, or other norms around how you do and don't engage with each other. And then setting those norms can then facilitate hopefully more open conversations, and even spelling out for each other, I understand the world this way and here's why, and it's based on this set of values and this set of priorities. And when you can understand each other a little more deeply and have a shared set of ground rules, it can be possible to come together in those conversations.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jean-Claude Monet. I'm actually the former Chief Knowledge Officer for Microsoft, and communities is the heart and soul of knowledge management. And for those of you who are not familiar with knowledge management, it's about the process of creating, sharing, reusing, and growing knowledge. And it's interesting, I've been giving hundreds of speeches, and always people think technology is the answer. People are the answer. So the angle that you take about community is the people one is extremely important. I just want to give you some ideas about this. Most knowledge enterprises like consulting companies, Accenture, Deloitte, and so on, they live and breathe by selling knowledge. And they are very vibrant communities. So if you want to find example of very vibrant community with data, you can go there. At Microsoft, I was part of Microsoft Services, which is like a mini Accenture. It's 23,000 people. And the response time of questions by people, we had 100 communities representing 26,000 people, 30 communities at the median response time of less than 1 hour. Meaning that people over the world who don't know each other help each other. So diversity is diversity of thoughts, is the richness of any communities. And there is a very good book by Etienne Wenger called Building Community. Etienne Wenger is a Swiss psychologist. I'm from Switzerland, so maybe I'm biased. But, and it's about the study that he made about how we humans have in our DNA the need to help each other. And we started by helping each other, by protecting each other from the elements. And that's why it's in our deep fiber that we want to help each other. So, and it works. In the business, it works. I'll give you another construction company that is very good at building community is Fluor in the US. Would you think a construction company? But imagine the experience that you have when you build a bridge somewhere and you have to build another bridge. Do you reinvent the wheel? No, you want to leverage that knowledge. So I cannot upload more what you're doing because it's very essential to make the world get better. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the book recommendation. I think I've started a trend.
Do we have hey, Dan. Hi there, thank you so much. So much of what you said was, I could just talk about it for hours, something I find personally very logical on the meta level. I have a question actually that was brought up in my mind as part of your suggestions, and one of them being volunteering. So I'm actually starting to do some work connecting the value of pro bono activity with attorneys on empathy building as really benefiting the professional realm, particularly in the legal industry. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on the crossover there of community and understanding other people's perspectives on really people's professional lives. I realize it's a little more granular, but it's something that popped up, so it'd be great to know.
Yeah, so I can share with a more personal answer that I do a lot of volunteering in my life, and I really enjoy finding ways to use my professional skills to give back. So any number of ways that I can really feel that I'm contributing something unique and really meaningful and really helpful has been a huge source of meaning in my life for the last 20 years. And so I can just say I'd personally highly recommend it. I know volunteering is also very healthy for us, but it's something that has been a very, very special part of my life. So yeah, thanks for bringing that. And come find me.